It is now 1 o'clock Central. My name is Kristin Pekoll. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Throughout the program, I encourage you to use the chat box at the lower right corner of your screen to discuss any topics, share feedback, or raise questions. I'm wearing dual hats today as host and presenter, so if I don't catch your question, please ask again during the Q&A session at the end. Today's webinar is a live event and it is being recorded. The recording will be emailed and available online. All the links throughout the slides are live. And for everyone on Twitter, you can reach us at OIF or join the conversation at #intellectualfreedom, all one word. Today's speakers are all from the Office for Intellectual Freedom here at ALA. Jamie LaRue is the director of both OIF and the Freedom to Read Foundation, author of The New Inquisition, Understanding and Managing Intellectual Freedom Challenges. He has given countless keynotes, webinars, and workshops on intellectual freedom, advocacy, building community engagement, and other topics. Prior to his work for OIF, Jamie was a public library director for many years in Douglas County, Colorado. Deborah Caldwell Stone is Deputy Director of OIF. An attorney by training, she now works closely with librarians, teachers, and library trustees on a wide range of intellectual freedom issues, including book challenges, internet filtering, meeting room policies, and the impact of new technologies and the USA Patriot Act on library privacy and confidentiality. My name is Kristin Pekoll, and I am the Assistant Director. I work directly with librarians and teachers who are going through the challenges, and I work with the OIF team in providing emotional and professional support and educating the public about censorship. It's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar, Your Guide to Reporting Censorship, and now I'll pass the mic over to Jamie.
Thank you so much, Kristin. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for joining us. I wanted to talk first a little bit about what we see as the scope of the database that we maintain about all these challenges. Not too long ago, I guess several months ago, we sat down with the staff to say, in the past we've used an old Access kind of database that helped us keep on top of all the challenges, and it was looking a little long in the tooth, and it was time to upgrade this. So as we sat down to say, what's the new tool that we want to collect and analyze this data, first we said, what are we gathering? So this is what it is. First, we want to make sure that we're on top of attempted censorship activity in United States libraries or within the United States of books and authors. We're trying to track censorship attempts in U.S. public educational institutions, sometimes not necessarily the library. It might be a school curriculum or an academic exhibit policy. Next, we're trying to stay on top of challenges to privacy in libraries, and we'll talk about some examples of that a little bit later. And then as of January 2017, we're tracking something new. We noticed that right after the last election, we saw a remarkable upsurge. We now have 8 reports of hate crimes in libraries, and I'll talk more about that definition. Basically, it's vandalism, where somebody scrawls swastikas on a library wall, or it's intimidation, where someone is actually making threats against people. We now have a total of 8 since the election. We don't know if that's a trend or not, but the upsurge was so surprising that we thought we should start to gather some of these things. So again, that's the scope. We're mostly concerned with U.S. libraries, also public education, and tracking challenges to privacy and hate crimes. So let's jump right to the point here. Why do we want you to report? And the bottom line is, as Kristin said, we want to provide both emotional and professional support. Often when you are being challenged, particularly if it's the first time you've been challenged, it is a very emotional thing. You can feel defensive and a little bit lost. And the more information we have about what titles are being challenged, where they're being challenged, the language that people are using to challenge them, the better we can support you. The second bullet point here is the idea is that we have begun to realize that this database is a rich source for potential research. And so statistical purposes to say, are we seeing particular kinds of language popping up in certain parts of the country? Or how does the language used to describe a challenge change over time for frequently challenged books? So this is the beginning for a powerful tool for research. Next, reporting challenges helps us provide better information to support librarians and teachers facing similar challenges, so you might be the first person to put your finger on exactly what the issue is. That gives us a heads up so we can support the next people better. And then finally, a big part of the mission of the Office for Intellectual Freedom is that we're trying to take the extraordinary core value of intellectual freedom out to the larger public. So as public researchers, media students, about what books and issues are under threat and why. So that's why we want you to do this. Now, some of the other huge issues that we faced here is that we know that our database is not complete. And there are a number of reasons for that. One thing is that in 2011, several studies were done to say how many people are taking the time to report their challenges. So one of those informal surveys in March 2011 confirmed that only 20.6% of the challenges, so 160 that we knew took place in a particular area, only 33 of them were reported. So 20%. Oregon State Library did another study and found that there were recorded 28 challenges that year. Only 5 of them wound up being reported to us. The Missouri School of Journalism managed to dig up using Freedom of Information Act requests. There were 51 challenges that actually had happened in libraries that tracked that, but only 6 of them made it to us. And Texas, ACLU, did a study and found that out of 67 reported challenges, only 2 of them got reported to us. So we know we're not working with the complete set of what's being challenged. So why is that? And we think that there are at least 4 reasons for it. One of them is sometimes I think people get embarrassed or worried that they don't want to report the challenge because it makes them look bad. They say, I know what... So if somebody complains about a book because they think it's they are opposed to LGBT titles, a library director or a school librarian might say, boy, that makes us look kind of bad. Let's just make this go away as quickly as possible. Or maybe they're afraid that ALA is going to judge them harshly. Again, our primary purpose is support. We certainly do believe that censorship should be opposed, as you saw in the opening slide, but our object is to support professional librarians in providing the broadest possible access to ideas. Another reason that people might choose not to report to us is because they're reporting elsewhere. I know when I lived in Colorado, it was an actual part of our annual public library reporting to say which challenges, what happened to them. So you may feel if you do that, then you don't have to report it to ALA. And then in the past, people have raised this interesting kind of question. They say, well, we're a public library. ALA is not a public library. You're a private institution. You're not for profit. Can you require us to report? And no, of course we can't. ALA is a professional association, and we've tried to lay out the reasons that we want to use this information, again, mostly to support you, but we can't require anybody to report. So what that means is that we don't wind up with a significant percentage even of the challenges that happen in a year. The last one I think is kind of a insidious one, and that's that many people don't even know that they can or should. One of the things we've noticed in 2016 was that there seemed to be a shift from, traditionally we saw most of our challenges coming from the public library world. I believe last year we saw that tip. Now most of them seem to be coming from schools. I strongly suspect that much of this has to do with the fact that school librarians are greatly threatened around the United States. There are fewer of them this year than there were last year. They get replaced with people that are maybe computer technicians or maybe volunteers, but they don't know that there was a collection development policy in the first place. They don't know that there's a request for reconsideration procedure, and they have no idea that they're supposed to report them to us. So one of the reasons we're trying to host this session today, and we've remodeled our reporting process, is to make it easier to get the word out, and anything you folks can do to help us send this message far and wide would not only benefit you in the long run, will certainly benefit us in the short run. So next I'd like to pass it over to our expert, Deborah, to talk a little bit about some of the terms that we use and some of the other issues. Deborah, take it away.
Thank you, Jamie. Central to the idea of intellectual freedom in the library is the user's right to find, access, and use library resources that represent a diversity of viewpoints. censorship efforts to suppress or remove these resources from the library impairs this right. And over the years, we've developed a certain vocabulary to describe the effort to censor materials in the library. And the first is a challenge. Now, a challenge is an attempt to have a library resource removed or have access to a resource restricted based on the objections of a person or group. And it's important to remember that challenges do not simply involve a person expressing a point of view. You know, as supporters of the First Amendment, we support the person's right to say that they have a concern about a resource, that they disagree with it. What we're concerned about is when they take that a step further and they make an attempt to remove material from the curriculum, from the library, thereby restricting others' ability to access that book or that film or the internet website, impacting their right to read the materials. Now, a book or other resource is considered banned when it's actually removed from the library and users can no longer access it. But there are times when a book remains in the library, but the restrictions on it amount to censorship, all but banning the book. For example, you place it on a restricted shelf and you put significant barriers between the user and the book, requiring written permission, written requests to access the book. That can amount to censorship. Now, we do have official censorship. That is when a governing authority, a library board, a school board, makes a decision to suppress or remove materials or even remove parts of materials from a book or a resource in order to restrict access to the content of the material based on disapproval of that content. We have a number of cases that illustrate the kinds of censorship that have been found by the United States courts to violate library users' First Amendment rights. For example, a school board's decision to remove a young adult novel about a romantic relationship between two young lesbians, Annie and My Mind, was found to violate the First Amendment. Interestingly, the basis of this decision was that the board had decided not to follow its own reconsideration policies. That is, a policy to consider a complaint about a book and decide whether it had been acquired in accordance with the collection development policy. They just skipped that whole process because they were so concerned about getting this book out of the library. And what the court said in that instance is that that was evidence of the bad intent, the effort to censor the book, that the court could consider as it moved forward. And as a result, that particular school board was ordered to return the book to the shelf and make sure that the students had access to those materials. The next case is an example of where the book isn't removed from the library, but the restriction amounts to censorship, amounts to a violation of the student's right to read. In this case, a parent convinced a school board that the Harry Potter books could harm students by teaching them witchcraft and defiance of authority. And as a result, the board voted to put the Harry Potter books on a restricted shelf and require written parental permission to access the books. And the board thought it was safe. The book was still in the library. If a student really wanted to read that book, they could go ask their parents for permission and get the book. But the court said no, that this actually violated the First Amendment rights of the students to freely browse materials in the library and make the choice for themselves without the involvement of their parents. So as you can see, censorship is not just removing books. It's also those efforts that might restrict access, even though the book or the resource remains available in the library. A public library example, a city council wanted to give power to members of its community to make decisions about materials in the library, and they passed an ordinance. They said any 300 people could sign a petition, and if that petition was filed with the head librarian, That petition could require the librarian to remove books from the children's area of the library to the adult area of the library. And this was used to remove Heather Has Two Mommies and Daddy's Roommate, two children's picture books, from the children's section to the adult area of the library. There were additional restrictions. The book was on a restricted shelf, and even adults had to make a written request to access the book. And the court in this case ruled that this was a violation of the First Amendment rights, not only of adult users, but child users, that children had a right to freely browse materials that were intended for them in the children's section as part of their First Amendment right to use the library. And again, this is a case where the library board, the city council in this case really, was ordered to allow the book to be returned to the children's section so that it could be freely browsed by child users. An internet example of censorship, and this is a particularly interesting one. This is what we call viewpoint discrimination. The school was using internet filters. It was SEPA compliant, so it was required to have the filters in place because they were accepting E-rate money. But they had adjusted their filters so that it blocked all access to gay positive websites while still allowing the students to access websites that opposed same-sex marriage, opposed civil rights for LGBT people, and generally advocated against provided a negative viewpoint of gay persons and gay rights. And the court ruled again that this was a First Amendment violation of the students' right to freely access materials in the library, that they had a right to view without restrictions being placed based on someone's prejudice against the materials. And in this case, the school actually had to pay an enormous fine to the court, almost $125,000 for their violation of the First Amendment. But the things to remember is that this was all found to be official censorship and violation of the First Amendment, there still can be unofficial censorship or censorship that's not remedied by the courts. And so a book can be removed and there's no official action taken, but it's still censorship. Or you can place a label on the book that's intended to prejudice someone's attitude toward the book or restrict a certain age group's access to the book, and that is a kind of censorship. And we are looking for reports of all these different kinds of censorship when we ask you to report challenges and book material removal to us via the reporting form. Now, as a result of having our database up and running since 1990, we've developed a set of statistics that provides a snapshot, a look at a moment in time at what's going on. But these compiled statistics show us that we've seen over 10,000 challenges reported and recorded in the Office for Intellectual Freedom since 1990. And what that means is that there's a challenge happening every day. And if you remember what Jamie talked about, that this is not representative, that we are missing challenges, often a great deal of challenges in our reporting and recording. It's something to think about that we have more than one challenge every single day reported recorded via our database. In the last in 2015, which is the last year that we have complete statistics for, we had 275 challenges, and of that number, roughly 10% were actually banned. So there are many efforts to restrict access, to ask for books to be removed, for filters to be put in place, to impair access to materials, and about 10% of those efforts actually succeed. And what's interesting, and it ties into the fact that we're seeing the majority of challenges now come from schools, 40% of the challenges are initiated by parents. And this just ties into the fact that I think, and this is just my observation, but that the majority of challenges that are brought to library materials concern materials that are made available to young people or intended for young people to read. We very seldom see challenges to adult materials these days. I think it's just been a shift in society. But But these are the kinds of numbers that the statistics that we've been able to derive from our database, and we're really hoping to improve this information by improving reporting so that we can develop a robust set of numbers and materials that researchers can use to look at these materials. So I'd like to pass it back to Jamie now and have him talk more about the new reporting form that's been developed here for your use.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. And again, I want to remind everybody that one of the key purposes of this webinar today is to try to persuade you that it is a professional responsibility to pass this information along to us. I've said this before, but I believe that censorship thrives when there is silence. In fact, that's what censorship is trying to accomplish. So it's vital that places that are under attack are taking the time to let us know about it so we can support people that are trying to defend the public's right to access this content. Again, since 1990, we've been maintaining this database on reported materials, or challenge materials, and we tend to get them from two sources. One of them is media reports. So we have a whole host of news alerts that are out there to say that if a book gets challenged or a book gets banned or a speaker gets kicked out of a public space, we can pull it up from the news, and of course that gives us a lot more information to talk about. It's already been reported publicly, so we can say where it happened and who was involved. But a second source is the idea that it's being submitted by individuals. So most often it's someone who works at the library. We compile all of this information about the media challenges, public challenges, into our journal of record, the Journal of Intellectual Freedom and Privacy. And then as time goes by, we recompile them into the Banned Books Week resource guide so that there's an ongoing record of the public challenges. But I want to make this very clear. As when we get reports that come in from individuals, we assume that this is confidential. And the reason for that is that people often feel when they're reporting it that their jobs are at jeopardy. This seems to happen more often in school libraries than in public, but it also happens in public. So when you report this to us, we are not going to try to do anything that exposes you to censure by your employer. So for that reason, the assumption is that it's confidential. And again, we'll talk more about this, but if you have questions or want to report the challenge over the phone, here's our phone number, or you can email us directly, and some people choose to email us from a private email because they're worried about their jobs. So we take this very seriously, the confidentiality of the report. So now let's dive into the report. It hadn't really changed in many years, and we really were requiring people in the previous online reporting form to check a lot of boxes to tell us, work through our hierarchy of terms to describe the issues. Now we're trying to make it a little more colloquial. There are 10 questions. We try to move you through them as rapidly as possible and to try to make it as painless as we can. So it begins with this. What are you reporting? For us to gather statistical purposes, statistical information, we need to know what the nature of the challenge is. Again, most often the challenges are two materials: books, movies, music, and magazines. There's a whole subset of challenges now that are related to the internet. So it could be filtering access to computers, the policies that govern the use of internet access. It could be more generic library services. And we've had a raft of questions about the use of meeting rooms. May they be used for religious programs? We have programs where somebody is upset about the fact that they feel that the library has sponsored a program because it took place in library space. We've had authors who've been invited and then been disinvited when members of the community dislike their views. We've had challenges that have happened about exhibits. And one of our quiet but continuing ones is the hold shelf practices. So for instance, if somebody puts the name of the patron on the slip of the hold book, they have now exposed what that person is reading to the world. So there are a number of things that are broader than just book challenges. We've mentioned that we're trying to track more closely patron privacy or confidentiality. We believe that this is a rising issue in our society. Everybody, either you're being monitored by the government or you're being monitored by some corporation. And in particular, we want to make sure that personally identifiable information and circulation records of library use remain confidential. And as I mentioned, we've talked about hate crimes. So I want to make a distinction here, as we've talked about this, and we have also consulted the Office for Diversity. We've said, so we're not tracking hate speech. Hate speech is where if I stand up and I say, I don't like some particular ethnic group or racial group, that too is free speech. It may be rude, it may be, it can get to the point where it's libelous, but just saying something that is hateful is not illegal and it falls under free speech. But when it moves into, I am now defacing library property. And so the example, again, would be in Evanston, Illinois, by the end of December, we had someone who came in and took works that were Muslim, and they defaced the book, and they wrote statements on it, and they, basically destroyed books. We have the reports of places like Kansas City, where someone is putting swastikas on the library bathroom wall. So at that point, this is a crime. It's hate crime. And then the one that isn't called out as clearly here as perhaps as it should be is this idea about intimidation. And again, somebody can say, I don't like Muslims. But if they walk up to somebody, as has been reported to us in a library parking lot, where somebody says to a woman in a burqa, your days are numbered, that's a threat, and that's a crime. So our assumption here is that whoever is responsible for the reporting of these things, typically to the police, will do that first. But then we are putting out a call to say, let us know if this is happening. Again, we're not sure if this is a trend. It appears to be trending. And that helps us to decide how we might, working with the Office of Diversity, figure out a way to provide ongoing support or programs or new materials or various thought leadership guides. So if it does happen to be a materials challenge, we're asking for the type of item. And again, what we mean by this is it a book? Is it a magazine? Is it a movie? The author or performer, so who created the work, what title it was, and then any additional items that might be attached to that. So that's pretty straightforward, we think. And then please describe the incident as instead of trying to guide you through it, just tell us what happened. And it might be something like a grandmother came in and she complained about a book that her child found in the children's room. We want to know when it happened. Again, we're trying to group things to see if sometimes there's a spate of challenges that happens around some public event. So we want a date. So we'll take the exact date if you got it, but if you say, last week or something, that's okay too. Again, we want you to get the information in as rapidly as possible. Our next question, number 4, is who initiated the challenge or raised the issue? And again, what we're after is who is it who actually referred this to you? And so we would say if it's somebody came and said, I checked out this audio tape and I couldn't believe the language on it. They used the F-bomb over and over. So that's the patron. I am complaining about a work that I read myself. A parent, somebody coming and say, I don't like what I found for my child. It could be a teacher. We have even had reports by librarians where a librarian has even initiated the removal of a book. So that's something that we try to watch very carefully too. It could be a school or library administrator. It could be an elected official. Just let us know who it was and what their relationship to the item was. We also would like to know if you think that it's part of a larger thing. And I know this happened myself when I was a library director, is that I began to get about one challenge a week, and they were all very similar in language and approach. And then, finally, I was able to track that back to a particular group that was trying to initiate these challenges. And then number 5, in the past, we had tried to get you to sort through various terms, and I think sometimes people found this confusing. So what we want to know is what was the specific language, what specific words did the person who was complaining use to express what bothered them? And so if they say, I don't like this because it's about Muslims and I think Muslims are not to be trusted, that's what you write. The concern was Muslims, and the patron said they were not to be trusted. And then we'll translate that into an issue description. We'll do the cataloging instead of making you do it. Next question is supporting documents. And this is something that, again, I believe was initiated by Kristin. And she was saying that, often when something shows up as a public challenge, we want to keep track of this. So it could be that it showed up as a tweet, and if you have a way to capture that, attach that image. And that goes into our database that is now far richer in comment and supporting materials. It could be that there was an article about it in the newspaper. We can take a PDF of that. It could be that somebody wrote something, as we see here in the case of someone writing in the Quran. If you have an image, it again provides wonderful information for us that's very specific, and then we can be more accurate in our descriptions of what comes in. Next, we want to know where. And again, I'll come back to this point later, but our first concern is that sometimes we can see that things are happening in regions of the country. So we're interested in the state and what type of library you are. Again, public school, school curriculum, or other. We had a hate crime reported in what was a literacy center, close enough in our view to a library to include it. So again, we'll try to make things easier that you can just click it quickly, but if it doesn't fall into one of those categories, type it in. And then we're also interested in the name of the institution where the issue took place. Now you can see that, let's say that you are worried that your job is in jeopardy. And you're afraid that if you put the state and the title and the type of library and the name of institution, you're going to be exposed. So we still want this information for us to track internally, but you'll see as we move into some of the other questions, maybe you don't want us to share that information with other people, in which case we will honor the confidentiality. And that's the question. May we have your permission to disclose additional information? In our public reports. Now the public reports have two kind of formats. The first one is what you see in the what we call the short list, the list of the books that were challenged within the space of a year. And you would see that information includes all that public stuff. It was challenged, here's what happened to it, here's where it was, this is what the nature of the complaint was, and here's our source for it. And then we also report internally to the Intellectual Freedom Committee at our annual conference. And so these things are available for our committee members to use, and it might find its way out into a larger audience. And there again, you'll see that here's the name of the item, what kind of item it was, where it took place, what kind of action we took to cover it. So again, in most of these cases, the public information does not include your name. It includes the title, it includes the nature of the complaint, it includes the state, and when we can get it, it includes the name of the institution. And I will continue to watch over here on the chat box to see if anybody has questions, and do type them in, and we'll come back to them later. And then finally, again, the reason we do this is to help our members. And so off on the left, you'll see the kinds of support that we are able to provide. So that would be maybe we just talk to you on the phone and we help you sort through the options. We have a crack team that reaches back to all of the books that have been challenged since 1990, and we may find maybe you need reviews to justify why you purchase something. Maybe you need samples of collection development policies. Maybe you need to sharpen up your request for reconsideration or figure out a way to talk about this with the school principal. So we can help you coach you on this. We can do research about local laws and regulations. Sometimes people call up to say, something happened in my library that I feel uncomfortable with. Is that even legal? And we can say, yes, there are state confidentiality laws that make that clearly illegal. Now let's talk about how you can respond to it. We can talk you through how to host a controversial event to deal with the media or to deal with the public. And again, I've mentioned that we do policy and procedure analysis. We can write letters to the newspaper for you, letters to the school board, letters to the Board of Trustees. So this is to give you some suggestions about things that we know we can do. But if you have something specific you want to ask about it, here's the place to put it. And then next, finally, we say, how can we reach you? And as we note on the slide, you are under no obligation to give us this information. But often, as we're trying to research something to understand that we have a good and accurate grasp of what actually went on, we need to follow up with somebody. So again, this is not to broadcast your name or email or phone, but we would recommend, again, if you have any concerns about preserving yourself, that you give us a private email or a personal phone rather than an institutional one, and we will honor that. And again, notice a little click box, yes, I need help, contact me as soon as you can. And so, Kristin, I think now we'll move over to, Kristin does wind up a place to, actually, let me respond to your question here first. I see Katie popped up and said, if there's no obligation to provide contact, why is the email address required? It's not required. It's just one of the ways that we can reach you. You can give us either the phone number or the email address. Okay, and Kristin, to talk.
It's a required part of the form, Katie, and that's a really great question. One of the new things that we're able to do with this form is provide a PDF copy back to the submitter, not a text version of it. So if you submit a form, all that information, that you have a copy of it for your record back to email. And it allows me to just, touch base with you and verify that the challenge happened. If you don't want to provide it by email, then I would suggest either giving us a call or sending it by PDF, and that's an available option as well. The
And yes,
email
the email is not released.
is never released publicly. Never, ever, ever. So thank you, Jamie, for going through the form. You did a great job. Support comes in many different forms, and it's not always public. We work on a lot of different cases, and we consult with a lot of people that it never comes to light. It's not only unique to the situation, but it's also unique to the person. Anyone can contact us, whether you're a parent yourself. I've had parents call me to talk about how to talk to the teacher who is restricting their child from reading. And we've kind of guided her along some support there. We've talked to teachers and librarians, administrators. Anybody can call us. Some librarians just want to report the challenge happened, and that's fine. You can submit the form in and leave it at that, and we don't need to follow up. Some calls require a little bit extra. Some require tissues and chocolate. I'm very protective of the educators who I talk to, and I want to guard not only their confidences, but their professional reputation and their emotional well-being. I've personally been on the other end of the phone. In 2009, over 80 books were challenged at the public library where I was the young adult librarian. And conversations with my predecessor, Angela, and with my colleague, Deborah Caldwell, who you spoke with earlier, were unique and life-saving. They understood the anxiety that I was going through, the stress, the frustration, in ways that my family and friends couldn't. And they even traveled to Wisconsin to support our community and talk about the freedom to read. Deborah spoke at our library board meetings about the legal repercussions of removing books from the public library shelves. So not only did they write a letter of support of the books and our jobs as librarians, they strategized the support of the president of ALA, the ACLU, the Wisconsin Library Science faculty. Whether the case is small and confidential or multifaceted and public, we will work to support you in the ways that you need. In addition to the streamlined form that allows you to report the challenges, we've reorganized and relocated information and resources about challenge support and reporting to ALA. It's now under the heading of Professional Tools. This page is separated into two different parts. First, you're in a challenge. Someone has complained. You need instantaneous resources and contact information. That's this first part, personal support during a reconsideration process. This gives you a little bit of an idea of what the phone call is going to be like. What kind of information are we going to be asking you about? Your institution's policy and procedure. How is the response? Is it a formal written request or is it just a complaint? Those kind of questions. This gives you, and then it gives you some additional resources that you might need in that exact moment and during the reconsideration process. The second part is guiding documents to prepare your library. There will be more resources and revisions to come, and I'm working with some amazing minds in the intellectual freedom community to update materials and links for the future. But this gives you an idea of some of the resources that are available as you work to protect your library, just in case something like this would happen. The Library Bill of Rights interpretations are really great support structures. Even libraries have adopted them as part of their collection policy. Developing policies, selection and reconsideration policy. We have a working group working on this right now. Privacy policies, internet use policies. There are a lot of toolkits and resources available for that. And there's a document on how to work with concerned adults that may have questions about why is this book in the juvenile section instead of the young adult section, or how come my child can check out an adult book. So these kind of typical questions, a frequently asked questions document that will help prepare librarians in case of a challenge. And then these are just a few more resources that talk specifically about challenges and reporting and highlight current censorship and privacy cases going on around the country. The Intellectual Freedom Manual is the ninth edition. This is a completely revised manual. It's incredibly helpful and user-friendly. It not only looks at some of the interpretations, but it analyzes them and really makes it practical for librarians in school libraries, public libraries, and academic libraries. We have a second new issue of the Intellectual Freedom and Privacy Journal that is available online, and subscriptions are available for $50 a year. We have the Intellectual Freedom News. All of our past issues are available on our blog. There's a link there. And then anybody can subscribe and get it automatically in their email. And those usually come out every Friday. We have news interns that help us collect all the different links and news articles from papers around the country, but we really welcome any additional articles, especially if they're behind paywalls. So if anybody is aware of articles and they want to send them to OIF, that would be great. And then, of course, we have our e-learning, and we try to have webinars once a month that really target different topics and categories that we need to. We are having one next month that I think is going to be fantastic on public library service in the Jim Crow South. So I think that's going to be a really great one. And now is a great time to start thinking about your questions. So we have Jamie and Deborah and myself available to respond to any questions you might have about reporting challenges, about preparing for challenges, how we can best assist you, and any ideas that you might have for improving our work. How do we know if the webinar is free? It's usually very clearly marked on the webinar page. Otherwise, it'll say that it's $25 for non-members and $20 for ALA members.
And this is Jamie. I wanted to point out something too, is that as we're working with this form, if you find when you fill this out that there's something that's unclear or difficult, please let us know that. Again, our intent is to make this as frictionless as possible so we can get good, accurate, fast information. And while Alexandra is typing, I'll go back to something I can't remember if I said earlier, but I intended to. And that's that, again, one of the big reasons that we try to gather all this information is I really view librarians as firefighters. And by that I mean we take a look and we're watching what goes on in the forest of our culture, and if you see smoke, you want to get it before it turns into a big blaze. And so this idea about reporting things is one of the ways that we just monitor what seems to be happening with intellectual freedom around the country. Okay, again, is there anyone out there with questions or comments? Oh, you know, actually I'll toss one more thing in, and that's that people have asked me in the past, who's the one who should be reporting? And my response would be, it's okay if we get 2 reports about the same incident from one person. If you happen to have observed this, you have any personal knowledge of it, it's okay to double report something. We don't count it twice. We would still count it once. So my response would be, anybody who happens to notice that this went on, please report it to us. Okay, Alexandra, I'll tackle this and others can jump in too. Is it necessary for one to first approach one's direct supervisor? We would hope that in a library that it would be obvious that something had happened and you would be talking through to say, first, everybody knows that we have a policy about it. Second is that we are following our policy. Third, we're asking ourselves, have we reported to all the people who should know about it? And again, that's the best world, and I recognize that not all institutions operate that way. So by all means, we hope you can talk about it with your supervisor, and your supervisor would report it. But if you have any concerns about that, please pass it along anyhow. We're not out to hurt anybody. We just want to gather information. And Wanda, no, we don't want you to wait until there's a resolution. We want to know as soon as the challenge happens, because often that's the point where the librarian needs assistance. We are very proud of the fact that we have managed to preserve many books in libraries throughout the years. And often that's because even though the librarian wasn't sure what to do, we could reach out to them and we could provide some resources and we can influence the outcome of the resolution. So we'd rather get in as early as we can.
And as Jamie went through some of the form questions, and if you've ever reported challenges before, any feedback that you have for us about its usability, even if it's not a question or something you don't like, if you want to even tell us how great it is, we'd love to hear that too.
And I should also say that if some of you out there did have a challenge occur in your library and did not report it, let us know what held you back. Then if there's something else that we need to be aware of, if there's anything we need to change about our own processes, again, we want more accurate information and we want more comprehensive information, and you are the source of that information. So please let us know how we can work with you to get it.
Do we have any additional questions or thoughts, ideas? We've got a couple people typing.
That's good.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
So Emily, yes, if you have a concern about any of your policies, just even contacting us to say you're not reporting a challenge, you just maybe want to talk about how good your policies might be or any concerns that you might have about that. And that kind of consulting is something that is very much in our job descriptions. We are always on the lookout for best practices, and we're trying to build our own internal library of good sample policies so that we can share those with people. So by all means, contact us if you have any concerns about that.
And even just the process of how do you go about changing a policy, people may not understand the process. So you see something that you're unsure about, you think maybe it should be changed, talking to Deborah or calling the office, she can guide you through what the process of changing that policy is. She'll look at your bylaws, she'll look at how your library is set up, and really tailor her advice to your specific situation.
Okay, and we're pausing because we have, it looks like one more person typing, and then perhaps it's time for us to wrap up a bit. Okay, so Wanda writes, my own library system has a small number of a year that I report, but they're generally resolved with a response letter. That's good. That sounds like you have a good process in place. I've heard that other public libraries just write letters and that's the end of it, so no one thinks it's important to report. And I would beg to differ. Again, I think that often we have things that run just under the horizon or just under the water. And so there's this kind of a steady stream of things, and then suddenly something can explode. The best way for us to keep on top of this is to understand what those currents are, what's happening underneath the surface. So please do let us know.
I think, Wanda, that's also why we see such a discrepancy in what the states may know about for reports versus what ALA has. A lot of it is anecdotal, and they may have some of the stories I've heard and just not know to report it, or just don't have the time for it.
So perhaps the last thought we should leave you with is, again, thank you so much for your interest in this topic. I believe so strongly, and I know everyone in Office for Intellectual Freedom agrees with me, that the work that we do is vital, that we are supporting for trying to make sure that everybody has the right to access the content of our culture. And often we are the only place within a community that does that. So thank you so much for the good work that you do. And Mr. Kleiman remarks that our comments may result in an artificial increase. Well, again, our intent here is to find more comprehensive and accurate work, and to do that, you have to put out the call. So that is our intent. Okay, and thank you, Wanda May and all. Kristin, any final thoughts?
No, keep your eyes open for the webinar in the end of February, and we are preparing for our midwinter, where there will be lots more intellectual freedom activity going on. And I look forward to seeing a lot of you and talking to you then. Thank you for coming.